Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. For today's team up deck, we're going to be looking at Doublade. Tool Drop is back, this time in the form of a stage 1 attacker, doing a ×3 multiplier rather than ×2. Way back when there was a Trubbish that could do this for a Psychic and Colorless. That was in an era when we had Dimension Valley, so a single attachment trying to reach one-hit KOs, and now it's back in the form of this Doublade. Onto the basic concept, and it's really quite a simple one. So many decks have seen success in the Pokemon TCG by being non-GXs that can uptrade on GXs for one single attachment. Doublade falls into that category, and that gives me great hope for the archetype. I really do think it has a big chance of being successful in the TCG, just because it's a cornerstone of the game. We've seen time and time again, if a non-GX attacker can efficiently uptrade, it's going to be really just impactful in the game. Genesect GX helps us ramp damage even into stage 1 and maybe even some stage 2 GX Pokemon, which is really impressive as well. And I think we have a good amount of tools in the format right now that really does supplement the Doublade to give it lots of different options to keep attacking, and also gives us some nice freedom of movement to allow us to use a Jirachi engine, which is very, very good for this deck as well in terms of consistency. So let's jump straight into that list. We have 4 of the new Doublade and Honedge. I've actually looked at a few different options for Honedge. This is the only metal one we have, and I've decided to play one copy of Lillie and Jasmine. So if we're playing Jasmine, we're going to be playing the metal Honedges. It has an attack for just 1 metal. You can flip a coin. If heads, you can discard an energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon, I think. It might only be their active, but either way, it's a coin flip attack that can, bail you out in weird spots. But the Doublade is the selling point here. 90 hit point stage 1 Pokemon that does tool drop 30 times the amount of tools on your board. And this is a really big multiplier. Obviously, if we have each one of our Pokemon with a full bench or with a tool on, we're going to be doing that 180, which is what we look for. If that tool in the active is a choice band, we're doing 210, which is great. And if we have a Genesect GX with 2 tools attached to him, thanks to his double drive ability, we can do 240, which is huge numbers. And that's the ideal board state that we're looking for with this build. We're going to be having 3 of the new Jirachi. It squeaks into this deck as well. That ability is so strong for pulling out some important item cards and trainer cards for us, for improving our turn 1 supporter odds, getting us more ball search in the early turns, as well as finding us tools and adventure bags, stuff like that. Obviously, I just mentioned that we need to not only get tools into play, but we need to get the Pokemon into play first. So Jirachi is oftentimes going to be looking for ball search cards in the opening turns to get our attackers set up, and also the other bench techs that we're playing in here. So the Jirachi is really awesome. It's always going to have an escape board on it. We play 4 in the deck. So the whole idea is that we can keep getting value from this throughout the game for, recovering our Doublades, seeking out Guzma when we need it, seeking out more tool cards to replenish that damage that we've just lost each turn. That's kind of the main sort of impetus of having the Jirachi in here. When you only have a 90 hit point stage 1, it's quite often that, it's going to be kind of glass cannon-like and get knocked out in response every turn, and this Jirachi helps us maintain our board quite well. We're going to have 1 copy of Magearna with that change close ability, allowing us once during our turn to put a tool attached to one of your Pokemon into your hand. This is going to be really nice because we play a few tools that you'll see on the next slide, and we want to reuse some, and we'll also want to make sure that we have a choice band in our active whenever we need that damage output. And sometimes if you don't need damage, you may as well just pick one up and save it for a future turn. So the Magearna helps us do exactly the amount of damage that we need. We're not wasting damage, and we're able to have the right tools in the right places, which is really good. I'm going to play 1 copy of the Wobbuffet with Shady Tail, just to shut off Prism Stars. We don't use any Prisms in our deck, so we're never hurt by this. And also, we want to shut down Ditto and Muck, because that is a very common approach that people will go for. Even if Zoroark decks are starting to put in Nanu and Grimer, the dark one. The Grimer is less searchable because it doesn't have 60 hit points with Elm, so at least it gives us a fighting chance to maybe Guzma up a Muck or a Grimer later down the line, and we get the immediate stop on the Ditto, which is really awesome. And if you go second and people Elm out their Ditto straight away, you can get this into play quite early, and they've deaded a bench space for them, which is also very good for us. So I think this Wob is really nice. It shuts down some random things as well, like the new Tapu Koko Prism Star, which is in a bunch of decks. Stops some energy acceleration for like Zapdos style attackers. So that's also worth noting. You can catch a few things in a crossfire with this Wobbuffet, which is quite nice. We have Genesect GX, which has 180 hit points and that double drive ability, allowing us to attach 2 tools onto him, which is really awesome. Obviously, if the ability gets shut off, we have to discard one of the tools and only have 1 remaining on him. But he is pretty helpful. Oftentimes, you're going to want to put some tanking tools onto him, so he's not just a Guzma target. So things like the metal frying pan are probably going to have to end up on him. Additionally, though, we are playing Exp.Shares in here, and we can actually power up into a Burst Shot or a Break Buster GX attack, so I may as well discuss them. As I just said, Burst Shot is the first attack. For 2 metal and a colorless, you do 130. So it is probably going to need things like Exp.Share to work his way into this attack, but it can be used, and with double choice band on there, we can get 1-hit KOs. And that Break Buster GX attack is the only one available in this list, and it does 190, and it's not affected by resistance. Not many things do resist metal, but it's worth noting, I guess. And this Break Buster GX attack is going to be great, and quite easily with a choice band, you're going to be getting 1-shots as well. So as we're promoting this Doublade threat throughout the game, forcing our opponents to knock those out, if we had a Genesect sat in the back with an Exp.Share and a not muscle dumbbells, what's it called? Metal frying pan, he's tanky, he's awkward to deal with, and he's going to be getting value throughout the turns, and maybe could even build up into a Break Buster GX attack, so do bear that in mind. From there, 1 copy of Tapu Lele GX. Wonder Tag is obviously going to be huge. I've already mentioned Jasmine as a supporter that we'd love to get rolling. It gets us 5 Pokemon if we went second. So that's going to get us a bunch of Honedge, Doublade, Jirachis, and even Magearna. That's amazing for our setup turn 1, because we really need to fill our board with Pokemon quite quickly. We can also grab the Genesect GX. So it gets literally everything but the Wob, which is awesome. And it's a really good selling point of this deck. If you do happen to go second, it's not really advantageous. I still think you'd choose to go first with this deck, but the Jasmine really does help in those sorts of situations. And just in general, Lele's Lele, and it's going to help us get rolling. Onto the items. Obviously, the tools are going to be the main section of this, but we do still have lots of ball search and whatnot. Going to play 2 copies of Adventure Bag. I feel like when we're using Jirachi, it makes sense, because we can dig for this card, then this card pulls out the most important tools for us. And seeing as though we're playing 5 different tools, we want to pick out some specific ones at the right times. 2 copies of Rescue Stretcher to try and recover our Pokemon, which is pretty obvious. 4 copies of Nest and Ultra. I really think we do need to have a lot of Pokemon search in here. As I said, before we can start slamming those tools down, we need a Pokemon in the first place. So the Nest Balls and Ultras, I think, are going to be really important. You can think about Pokemon communication as well, but we only play, I think, 15 Pokemon, so I don't think it's that worthwhile, not often that live, so I think just the ball search is the best way to go here. Going to play 1 copy of Counter Gain. I think when you have the double Adventure Bag and Jirachi to help dig it out, I think it's a lot better in the deck. As a stage 1, we can oftentimes just lose a prize in the early turns, especially, again, going back to that going second thing. It can happen quite often. We have some quite, easily knocked out Honedges and stuff like that, so being able to use Counter Gain as well as a basic energy attachment rather than spending a DCE increases our odds for hitting that attack on turn 2 in response, but also means that we're not, so reliant on DCE, which is really huge. I think that's the biggest thing about this deck. Seeing as though we have no way to recycle DCE, trying to reduce our reliance on it is what these tools are trying to achieve a lot of the time. We're going to have 2 copies of that Metal Frying Pan. I think in matchups where people want to deal with your GXs, you might just have to double Frying Pan your Genesect to put it off, out of range, which is really cool. In general, you can use it to, add some extra beef to your Doublades in turns where you don't need the damage output. It's only really niche situations where you're going to be tanking hits, but even against things like Bucephalon, you can force them to discard 3 energy cards, which I guess is kind of cool for just a non-GX, which is nice. And obviously, we don't need the damage output for the Bucephalon matchup, and we don't need to put the Genesect down either, so the Frying Pans can just sort of go on the Doublades when you need to. 2 copies of Exp.Share. I've already mentioned that we have the counter gain to reduce our reliance on these DCEs, and the Exp.Share is trying to do the same thing. I've mentioned how you can store one on a Genesect and maybe power that up, but it could easily go onto a Doublade as well. We have Change Close, so once we've got that Exp.Share proc, we can send a Doublade active, Change Close, get rid of that Exp.Share, put it on one back in the bench, and that could keep it, recycled, which is really nice. 3 copies of Choice Band for that extra damage output. Honestly, I think the board, when it's full, we're doing a really good chunk already. This means that we're not super reliant on the Genesect in a lot of situations, especially against, 180, 170 hit point GX decks. So that's really awesome. But that Choice Band is there just so that we can reach. And the 4 copies of a Skateboard we want to get into our Jirachi. Somewhat of a headache is that every single Honedge has 4 retreat. And that's really, really bad. I would have thought about playing a split of the types of Honedges if any of them had 1 retreat cost, but they all have 2, which really stinks because it means you have way less outs of getting that Jirachi active. But when Jirachi is active, it wants on a Skateboard, so that's what we're going to have. And it means that we can pivot as well between, knockouts that we receive, and that's really going to help us, again, like I said, try and recover our board state after we lose a Pokemon, sometimes a DCE, and sometimes a tool as well. So those are things we need to keep in mind. Onto the supporters, we're going to play 1 copy of Lillie. It's our best turn 1 supporter if we're going first for drawing us the most amount of cards we can. 2 copies of Jasmine. It can search a metal Pokemon, at the worst of times, but it's our best supporter when we're going second because it can pull out 5 metal Pokemon for you, which is just incredible for your board state and setup. And I really like that this deck isn't too afraid of going second or first. I think, like I said earlier, because you're an evolution deck, you still choose to go first almost every time. But if we're going to be going down a prize, going second, there are disadvantages there, but we have the potential to still be well in the game because we have this big, huge board swing of getting the Jasmine going for us early, which is really awesome. It can also help us grab Doublades throughout the game to supplement those 4 Ultra Balls that we have. I'm playing 2 copies of Erika's Hospitality. I feel like these are stronger than just adding in more Lillies into the deck. Although we do like to insta-play a lot of cards, I think that Erika can oftentimes get you more value if we are trying to hold on to pieces, which is pretty cool. So I think because we can lower our hand size enough for the Erika, we can get some good draw power from her. I think it's actually the first deck that I've profiled that's using Erika, but I do think it's a good card, and I think it fits into a deck like this because we can get pretty large hand sizes if we want to. But seeing as though our deck doesn't sort of deny or stop or punish anyone from benching stuff, so I feel like it's a pretty natural fit here. 3 copies of Guzma and 4 copies of Cynthia to round out the deck. These are all usual inclusions in pretty much everything, so it shouldn't be a huge surprise to you. For stadiums and energy, I'm going to play 1 copy of Mount Coronet as a stadium, just for a counter stadium, to be honest. I mean, I think it's better than just playing a 5th energy card, and seeing as though there's a lot of Prism Star stadiums roaming about, I would like to have 1 option to try and bounce it. Honestly, I would like a 2nd copy, but I feel going down to 3 energy cards is a little bit cheeky, especially because the Jirachi can scout this out as well, because it's a trainer stadium. So I think just 1 copy is nice. Again, for counter stadiums against Prisms is the biggest thing that I have in mind. And then we're going to be playing 8 energy cards, 4 DCE, 4 metal. I think that's going to be plenty with those Exp.Shares and counter gains that we can get plenty of attacks off. That's at least the fingers crossed hope that we have here. So here is the full list. Pause now if you want to get a good picture of it. It's also going to be in the description as always. But yeah, that's going to round out the 60. Onto the tech options. As I said, I did explore all the different Honedge options. There is one that has an interesting ability called Final Hour, and when it gets knocked out, if it's your active, you get to place 3 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. This can help you, put things into your range, which is nice, and also can threaten some spread damage if you're really just dead drawing and doing nothing else. I guess it gives you somewhat of an out, which is worth noting. And if you are to add in some Psychic Honedge, you could think about trying to have Mysterious Treasure in the build as just like a 1 or 2 copy, and that can lead you down a path of having Let Loose and increasing your Lele odds for turn 1 supporters, which is a pretty interesting thing to explore. I think overall I'm kind of all in on the Jasmine. I think that's pretty much the strongest. I think the 3 counters from Honedge isn't quite impactful enough. I think maybe if it was 4 counters, you could knock out things like Ditto Prism Stars. Could actually be a big deterrent and stop people taking knockouts on you. But the 3 I don't think is quite impactful enough. And although we are having Jirachi in the deck, I still feel the Let Loose is a little bit YOLO on your own end. So I don't think we even want that option in the deck at all. In fact, I think this deck might be quite scared of getting Let Loose, especially in the early turns while you still have, 12 clunky tools that you got to pull out of your deck. I've seen a Japanese list that has been playing Memory, Energy, and 1 copy of this Aegislash. Aegislash has 140 hit points and also has an ability that reduces 40 damage being done to it. So if we're playing this Exp.Share kind of deck, you could try thinking about having a couple Memory Energy in the build as well. and having this Aegislash in here so that against other non-GX matchups, you can just have this big 180 hit point wall that people have to get through. I think ultimately it's too many spaces for what I want. I want to be as simple as possible, as always. But if you want to try out the Aegislash, I mean, it's just 3 deck spaces. It wouldn't be the hardest thing to try and weave into the build, but honestly, I like my Wobbuffet. I don't want to get rid of that because it really reduces your weakness to muck, which the deck really does struggle against, and I think there's a couple other spaces that I wouldn't really like to cut into, like the adventure bags. I think those are really nice cards for helping consistency, but those would probably be the spaces that you cut to weave in the Aegislash to try and be a little bit tankier, and I guess it is an option if you want to, you know, try and skew a prize race. Metal Goggles is a tool that I'm choosing not to play. I think the Frying Pan overall has higher value, like I said, allowing you to put down a Genesect and a Blacephalon matchup just because you have the pan to fall back on can be a good deal. I think as well, putting them even on your Doublades is good value so that you force more discards from them, or not discards, lost zones from them with their Blacephalon attacks. And I think that outweighs the Metal Goggles value against something like Zoroark Decidueye Ninetales. I think they won't be doing their spread attacks with Ninetales anyway, because they're obviously weak to metal. So it's just the Decidueye pings that you have to worry about. And I think this deck has enough Pokemon search that you can evolve out a lot of the time. They'd probably focus their pings on Jirachis, and they need skateboards anyway. So I think it's not a big enough deal for Decidueye in this matchup, because they'll just focus their pings elsewhere regardless. So I don't think it's worth it over the Frying Pans. And finally, I'm not playing Ditto Prism Star, but every time you're playing a Stage 1 deck, you could try and weave it in. We could add an extra couple draw cards in the deck to have somewhat of a backup engine. I think the Zeb Striker is a little bit risky. We don't want to sprint away excess tools, especially if there's like late game field blowers. That could be awkward. So I think I'm looking at the Pidgeotto and the Magcargo. Obviously, we're not playing Elm, but we are playing a few cards that synergize with Smooth Over. If you want to go down, you know, reduce the Cynthia count, increase the Lillie count, I think the Ditto Magcargo might be the best option. If you want to keep the supporter count as is, you could just try throwing in a Pidgeotto and see how you find it for some extra draw protection against Muck and just power in general to get us a few more cards here and there. I think the Ditto's a good card in general, though, just to give us a 5th Honedge just in the early turns, so I don't hate just having it in the deck for the sake of it. Obviously, if you are going to play the Ditto, you probably have to cut the Wob, and it's like, if you want to... It's kind of counterintuitive. You want to be better against Muck, so you can try having a Ditto plus draw stage 1, or you could have the Wobbuffet yourself. For me, I wanted the extra space, and that's why I'm not playing a Ditto stage 1. But if you can find the wiggle room, I think it's not a bad shout at all. So onto the matchup overview. I think the awkward ones are Malamar. Even with our resistance, I think the math isn't changed too much. I think with even a Frying Pan, they're doing 80 to us, and they can just use Giratina's Distortion Door to finish those things off anyway. I think if it's Ultra Squids, they can also do the Distortion Door plays into the Sky Scorching Light, and oftentimes we'll have 1 or 2 Jirachis on our board, let alone the Honedges, which can get knocked out, and it can really swing the game back in their favor. And I think things like Gascan will try and keep up with you for the most part, and again, they have some interesting like snipe options here and there, so definitely I think kind of awkward on that regard. One of the Malamar builds I've been trying in the new format is specifically playing spell tags to try and help non-GX matchups like Zapdos, and the similar sort of approach can be employed there, so that's definitely worth noting. Lost March I think is awkward. Like I said earlier, you don't really want to get hit with Let Loose. It's a lost condition for you in general. That's another thing the Malamar decks have on you, because if you don't start Jirachi, it can be pretty clunky and difficult for you to find a good hand when you still have all those tools rooting around in the deck. It's a big portion of your cards, and it's going to be awkward to get around. And again, they're going to be quite efficient at racing you, so that's just going to be a flat-out race, and they have Let Loose that they do likely on turn 1, and that's a little bit on the scary side. Passimian Coco, I think, is also quite awkward. We need to increase our damage output by putting Pokemon on the bench, so we can't play around Tapu Koko's attack very well at all. Oftentimes, the things we have to bench are Jirachis, and they're really fragile, so that's always a worry. I think Shuckle Hooper wall variants are also going to be awkward. We can, attack into Shuckles if we have enough attachments. We don't have any Judge or Let Loose on our own end, though, so if they get into that Stevens loop and Lucamine, they're just going to have enough stuff to stop us, which is going to be a problem. And I think finally Zapdos Jirachi could be awkward Again, it's a pretty much flat-out race, and Zapdos Jirachi is very good at racing. That's the biggest problem I foresee for this deck. That's why I believe it'll only be sort of tier 2 and not tier 1, because I'm thinking that Zapdos is going to keep this deck at bay, where this is like slower than Zapdos, but way better against like big stage 2 things, where Zapdos may sometimes struggle. So it's going to be interesting where this deck pans out. Overall, I think being able to abuse this Jirachi engine is promising. I think the deck is quite vulnerable to Let Loose, but beyond that, if you can use this Jirachi engine enough times throughout the game, you're going to be able to replenish your hand quite nicely, get those tools into play, make sure we can always have Doublade with a backup attacker, or at least have like a backup Exp.Share on the board. We have good comeback potential with the counter game, the Jasmine, if we're going second. So I think there are a lot of boxes being ticked here, and I think the fact that we only have 4 DCE is quite well sort of covered up by the fact that we have some mild energy retention in the deck as well. So let me know what you guys think about this deck. I'm, pretty content that it's going to be in tier 2, kept down by Zapdos for the most part. But if there's ever a point where Zapdos is trying to be countered in the meta, this could be sort of popping up and a safe play that can sort of crush some big GX decks by swinging really hard as well. So I think it's got a lot of potential. Let me know what you guys think. For now, though, it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll be back with another team-up deck tomorrow. Cheers.